Ensemble's beating heart was passion for games, and it fed into everything they did.
Age of Empires had this blend of action and sort of an abstract beauty.
The sun was always shining in Age of Empires games. It was inviting.
It was very good gameplay, and that just holds up.
It's so iconic that it's really stood up the test of time.
I was just out of college, or just out of quitting college. Wanted to get into programming, so first started as a freelancer, and then that led to starting Ensemble Corporation with John Boog-Scott.
It was the two of us initially, and we quickly had a few more people growing that company. And it was really focused on business software, did a lot of stuff with banks, your typical business stuff. But even in that venue, Tony, he was always a outside-the-box thinker, super creative at heart.
The company was largely successful. It grew slowly over time, and there were a number of people involved in the company, maybe 30 or 40 by the time we talked about starting a game company.
From the time I was a Dungeons & Dragons player in junior high school, I'd always wanted to start a game company. I thought it was a board gaming company, and then I thought it was a computer game company, so that was always on my mind.
I think Tony really only did the business stuff so we could get to the game.
We had absolutely no idea how to go about doing it.
When I was in junior high, I joined a gaming club called HSS, Historical Simulation Society. Bruce was there too.
I remember teaching them how to play some games, and they told me later that they thought I was one of the guys in the club that they looked up to.
I kept track of him, thinking one day I'll start a game company. He had been the co-designer of Sid Meier's Civilization and worked with Sid Meier's.
15 years later or so, Tony called me up actually and said he asked me about the process of making computer games.
Our theory is we were going to get all gamers to the company and see if we can build the greatest game the world had ever seen. That was our idea.
There was no game idea on the books when we started. The first idea that I recall was like the television show Lost, where people are stranded on an island and they have to get their materials together to get off.
The team at Ensemble definitely was taking influence of seeing how RTS was growing and how there were other RTS games out there that maybe weren't historically set.
I wanted randomly generated maps. I wanted the game to be different every time you played. And we wanted to have a non-cheating AI that played like a real human being.
Warcraft 1 really focused our direction.
We looked at Command & Conquer and Warcraft and Civilization, and we made a list of what those games were doing really well. Why were they successful? What was important about those games? We have to be as good as them in what they're doing really well. And what they're not doing is our opportunities. That's where we're going to make our game different.
I think the topic is the most important decision you have to make when you're doing any game.
My real passion was history. I read a lot of historical fiction, and so when Age came around, for me it was this perfect melding of the kinds of games that I like to play, real-time strategy games, with this history that I loved.
Turns out there was an awful lot of people who liked the historical aspects. I know I was asked once by Bill Gates. We had to make a presentation to Bill Gates, and he says, man, we should be marketing this as an educational thing. And I said, no, I don't think so. I mean, there's some education that might happen, but it's not going to happen until people are having fun. So we got to entertain them first, and if they learn something, then that's great. And then the idea came along, why don't we take the gameplay from Warcraft and Command & Conquer, this real-time strategy gameplay, and merge it with the historical and economic aspects of Civilization that I had helped build a few years earlier.
We got an early version of Age of Empires up and running, and all you could do is chop trees at the time, but it looked kind of like Age of Empires.
So Tony calls up Microsoft and he gets a guy on the phone named Ed Ventura, and he goes, you got to come down and see our demo.
So I had a product manager, Ed Ventura, who was out looking at different developers and different games that we could potentially sign, and he told me about Age of Empires and told me to come to Dallas and visit the team. It was actually pretty amazing because what we saw in this very, very limited demo was the heart of a lot of what we loved about Age. It looked gorgeous. It looked like a world you wanted to spend more time in. And the little mechanics that they had implemented were fantastic. And so that was almost an insta sign.
PC Gamer magazine ran a cover story called The Year of the RTS, and it had a cover story listing 50 RTS games coming in the next 12 months. Out of that, when we look back in history, only a very small number of games, are ones that people even remember today. We can be proud that we stood up to a lot of competition and exploration in a genre that was exploding at that time.
I don't think there's many people that don't know what Age of Empires is. Everyone knows it, everyone probably played it.
They gave us a plaque. I have it at home. for 1 million sales. They were ecstatic. It exceeded expectations at 1 million. At 2 million, I put a little sticker over it and wrote 2 million on it. At 3 million, I wrote 3. And after that one, I just kind of took it off and said, don't need to count anymore. It just kept going.
I remember coming off of the end of Age of Empires 1, which is right when I joined. Coming into the development of Age of Empires 2, it was kind of this moment that you get sometimes in the game industry where you have a team that just finished a game, like the first game in a franchise, and it's kind of, we just have this feeling of like, there's all these things we wished we could have gotten in that game, but we just ran out of time. And so everybody was dying to make the sequel.
And I think the Middle Ages was the best topic of all for a strategy game like that. I mean, men were still basically banging on each other and shooting arrows at relatively short range, and the units were still recognizable. We had these great images of knights and castles, and when you heard the trebuchet go off, it was really bad news.
The online component of being able to play against other human players was finally coming into its own there in the mid-90s.
We had just hit the sweet spot in the balance and the design of that game so that it's just endlessly replayable, especially multiplayer. The kind of scenarios that you encounter when you're playing online, they're just so varied, and there's so much strategy there that you can just kind of keep going. There's still, I think, new strategies being discovered today.
I think some of what happens, and you see this in a lot of franchises, the first one happens somewhat underground and it grows. And as a player, you feel like, oh, I kind of missed the boat on the first one, but it sticks in your head as one of these games that you have to go play. So when the second one comes around, there's a lot more interest in it because the name Age of Empires is out there. You feel like, okay, I'm not going to miss it this time. I'm not going to miss this launch event.
It was a perfect storm of a game. We'd learned so much making Age 1.
Age 2 was the ultimate, kind of the pinnacle for a whole variety of reasons. My favorite review, Computer Gaming World, said, this is the ideal sequel. This is what you want. It's got all the heart and the feeling of that first game that you loved with just the right amount of novelty and new features to give it new life and actually improve on that base experience.
Between Age 2 and Age 3 was Age of Mythology, which was a real departure.
We really love fantasy, but we also really love history. And then it hit us, that's mythology. That's the perfect topic.
The nice thing about Age of Mythology is it was a quasi-sequel. It was obviously rooted in a lot of the mechanics and ideas of the earlier games, but it gave them a lot more creative license. And I think it really gave them a little bit of a charge. Like, oh, hey, let's go off and learn about Norse mythology and how to work that in the game in an interesting way. And let's create some new mechanics and some things that you could never have in a historically based world.
It was this branch of the franchise, right? It wasn't a mainline Age of Empires title, but so many people responded so strongly to it. It kind of had the most active and vocal community of any of the games we had worked on.
By the time we got to Age 3, the team down at Ensemble was really kind of world-class as a game production team. I think a lot of times you see teams in that third or fourth iteration for them really hit their stride because so much of what it means to just be a team working on a video game together goes away, and it becomes about focusing on the game itself.
I have to say some of the campaigns in Age 3 were one of my favorites in the whole series.
We had physics, cannonballs, hit buildings and broke off little pieces of buildings, and we just tried to amp up the realism.
It was Age coming to North America, which was a new challenge. We added the home city, which kind of added an RPG element to the Age franchise. There was more change, I thought, in Age 3 than the previous Ages when they were trying to add so much more to the franchise, but I was proud of what we were able to accomplish.
Bruce has a fantastic saying, the sun always shines in Age of Empires. Age was always a place where it was idyllic. It was just a place that people could recognize and they could connect with.
What makes Age special is it's easy to pick up and play, but it's really deep. So anybody can jump in and enjoy it, but it takes real mastery to get great at them.
We did a lot of different experiences in those boxes.
Nothing feels, out of place, right? There's this amazing holistic environment that players can kind of get into. There's deep levels of strategy and always new things to explore and to learn. And when you have a nice big community, there's always people influencing how the game is played, how it changes over time, how the meta experience of the game evolves, and that kind of keeps them fresh year after year after year.
Age of Empires 2 was really built around user-made content, even after 20 years. People are still churning out content and playing new stuff, and there is no limit to that, pretty much.
I was mostly just playing around the scenario editor, loved elephants, loved just screwing around and kind of building these giant battles.
You would get parents that would talk about the Age of Empires as something that they felt was good for the kids, because it actually kicked off at least a question about history. And I think that's maybe as important as really injecting the history lesson right into the game.
What Ensemble Studios did 20 years ago has affected millions and millions of people and gave them some good memories. To me, that's the most important thing, I think.
I love working in the game industry because every once in a while I get to meet my heroes. And for me, the Ensemble guys, the Age guys, they were my heroes.
We were also passionate about Age of Empires and about what we were excited to bring to the world.
They worked long hours, they poured everything they had into this game. And then I think the other thing that was a little surprising was how good everyone was at their jobs, even though most of them had no background in games.
The number of talented people that Ensemble Studios attracted was amazing. I think part of the formula was that we didn't know anything about games. We didn't have any ideas about what was hard, so we just thought everything would be easy, and we moved forward with stuff.
There's still people who play Age of Empires 1 today. If these guys didn't go anywhere in the last 20 years, I don't see them going anywhere in the next 20.